So I know y'all were looking forward to getting away from me for a week, but yeah, you're just out of luck. Um, as I mentioned, this course is kind of more difficult and involves a lot more critical thinking, so I didn't want to leave you for an entire week without going through and talking about some of the things that you're going to be reading about and discussing them with you, and trying to put them in more simple language so that they're easier to understand. I didn't just want to leave you for a week just to read and answer questions, especially since you've got some quizzes coming up. Um, right now, it looks like you'll be taking quiz 4 on Monday, February 25th, and then you'll get notes for quiz 5 on Tuesday, February 26th. Both of those notes actually should already be on My Schoolworks. You can log in there, go to this class, and click on one of the quizzes and see all the notes just like we did for government and all that kind of stuff. So all that stuff should already be set up, but so we should have finished the other day up to page 59, which starts to begin to talk about the basic law of supply. So another basic economic principle often talked about in conjunction with demand, and we remember that demand is any quantity of good that will be purchased at a particular price point. In addition to demand, you also have the law of supply. That law states that the relationship between the price of a good and the amount of suppliers will make available. Other things remaining equal, as the price of a good increases, the quantity supplied also increases in a free market economy. If the price of a good drops, the quantity that is supplied of that good also falls. Once again, the period of time must be specified in order to accurately determine supply. If you decided to mow lawns in the evenings and on the weekends in order to earn spending money, the number of lawns you determined to mow would depend on the amount of money you can make on each job. At the rate of $20 a lawn, you might supply 5 lawn mowings per week. However, if you found that you could increase your price to $100 a lawn, you would probably decide to mow during nearly every minute of your spare time. Of course, after your friends found out how much money you were making, competition would force you to lower your prices. The same principle is true with businesses. The more profit there is to a producer for supplying goods, the more goods he'll supply. The less profit there is in making a particular good, the less producers will be interested in supplying it. Firms are in business to make profits, and they will continue to supply their goods only as long as they're able to sell those goods at a price that is greater than their costs of production. So you have the supply curve and the supply schedule. After the research group showed their statistics on demand to Mr. Mendoza, he asked them to gather information about the supply of bicycles in Minneapolis, including both domestic and foreign bicycles brought in by other producers. From this information, Mr. Mendoza wished to analyze his competition and find out what quantity other bicycle manufacturers are producing at certain prices. The team included many suppliers in their research and found there were no suppliers willing to sell bicycles matching Mr. Mendoza's quality for under $800 each for a lack of profitability. However, higher-priced bicycles were found to be more in supply. When the research was finished, the team organized their numbers as they had done with their data on demand. Figure G at the bottom right of the page shows the supply schedule, which is a list of numbers that compares prices with the quantity supplied. So as you can see in Figure G, you have a supply schedule for bicycles. If they cost $1,000 a bike, there will be a quantity of 15,000 supplied per year. As the price begins to drop, the quantity supplied will drop, because if you're not making as much money and as much profit, you're not going to want to produce or make as many bicycles. If you're on, in the previous example stated, if you're mowing lawns and you're getting paid $20 a lawn, you're not going to want to mow as many lawns as if you were getting paid $100 a lawn. And that's because it's not worth as much your time. We kind of talked about that a little bit the other day when we were talking about the teachers getting paid and whether they would want to work overtime or not. If you're making time and a half and you're making $800 a week and you only have expenses of $500 a week, you're not as interested in taking your free time on a Saturday to work overtime as someone who's only making $400 a week and just barely skipping by. So, it's the same principle there. On page 60, the team also provided a supply curve, which is a graphic representation of the quantity of goods supplied at different prices. The entire curve represents the supply that bicycle manufacturers are willing to produce for Minneapolis, while any single point along this curve depicts the quantity supplied at the corresponding price. Once again, notice that the team placed price on the vertical axis, and they specified what unit of time they were using. The direct relationship between price and quantity supplied ensures that their supply curve slopes upward and to the right, just like all other supply curves. So if you look at the illustration on the top right that says mountain bikes, it says figure H. It's just a graph of that chart that's on the last page. If you look as the graph goes up at each point, it will tell you how many bicycles are supplied per year in thousands on heading to the right, and then the price on the left heading upwards. So each point on that graph you can plot exactly, quote unquote, how many bikes would be sold at that particular price point. Figure H shows the probable quantity of mountain bikes which would be made available for sale at various price ranges in the Minneapolis market during the course of the year. At the price of $800, only 1,000 bicycles would be offered for sale, while at a medium price of $900, suppliers of bicycles would put 10,000 bicycles on the market. At the relatively high price of $1,000, manufacturers and importers would be ready to supply 15,000 bicycles. The higher the price, the greater the quantity supplied. Now here's the thing. Sure, if people are selling bicycles for $1,000 a piece, there's going to be all kinds of companies going, yeah, we're going to produce bicycles. But are there going to be enough consumers to demand that many bicycles? I mean, I don't know about you, but I'm not going to buy a $1,000 bike. I'm sorry. I can think about other things that I'd buy rather than a $1,000 bike. I can think of a lot of things better to buy than an $800 bike. So, I mean, these two things react directly in correlation to each other. There's no point in supplying 15,000 bicycles at $1,000 if your customer base only wants 500 bikes at $1,000 because nobody can afford a $1,000 bike. So you have to balance that out back and forth. So continuing on, we have changes in supply. The research data and charts show the supply of bicycles that manufacturers are currently willing to sell at various prices, assuming that all other factors remain constant. A lot of stuff in this book are particularly talking about things in a perfect world at this point. We're kind of talking about supply and demand in these big general terms where we're not taking into consideration, okay, so the price of bicycles is this much, it costs this much to produce them, so we're going to make this many. Well, we're not counting the fact that our factory for bicycles was closed down last week because we had a fatal error in one of the machines used to produce the bike. We're not keeping track of any of that. We're talking about it on general terms. There are several factors that can increase or decrease the entire supply. As shown in figure I, the entire supply curve shifts to either the left or the right when there's been a change in one of the following 6 factors. So these are 6 factors that you need to kind of keep in mind when it comes to supplying a good. Number 1 is technology, right? So the first one, if there's a technology jump and suddenly the ability to produce your bicycle is increased and it's cheaper because we found a way to automate part of the procedure that we used to have 5 guys putting one part together. That's going to affect your supply curve. Technological improvements constitute the largest influence on the amount of goods that producers are able to supply. As researchers, engineers, chemists, physicists, and other scientists construct new formulas, compounds, and machinery and work at making existing ones more efficient, the cost of producing the goods that people demand falls drastically. For example, before the late 1970s, computers were bulky, expensive, and rare, but new technology has enabled manufacturers to greatly increase both the supply and capabilities of computers while reducing their price and size. So, the first computers took up entire rooms, entire buildings. Every piece had to be custom made by hand, right? Because, they didn't have factories set up to produce circuit boards and chips. So they were extremely expensive. Nowadays, computers produce computers. A lot of these pieces are made in automatic factories. You can go out and you can buy a cheap laptop computer for $150, $200 for a small netbook. So, compared to the fact that a computer used to cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to build, to now where you're buying a computer for $150 purely through the influence of changes in technology. So another thing that can change the supply curve are resource prices. The amount that producers have to pay to obtain the resources they need, land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship, plays a large role in determining the supply of a good. If metal suppliers suddenly decrease the prices they charge for aluminum and titanium, then the manufacturers will produce more than they did before the price hike, and the supply of bicycles will increase. Conversely, if the wages that these manufacturers pay their employees go up, the cost of production will also rise and the supply of bicycles will fall. So again, this is kind of what we talked about a little bit the other day when I talked about where I worked across the street. These are factors that will change sometimes on a daily, if not hourly basis. I told y'all to kind of maybe take the time. It wouldn't take you but 5 minutes. Go on Google, search up the metals prices. So search up the price of gold, search up the price of silver, search up the price of aluminum or copper or iron. There's actually markets, much like the stock exchange, where the prices of these goods change and fluctuate on an hourly, if not minutely basis. And I mean, so what costs you $10 today could cost you $20 tomorrow. It could cost you $12 an hour from now. And so this is something that can directly affect the amount of a good that's supplied. The third thing would be the prices of related goods. If the prices that consumers were willing to pay for motorized scooters were to fall, manufacturers would be less eager to provide this good, and the supply would also fall. Instead, manufacturers would look into making substitute goods such as bicycles. The result would be that the supply of bicycles would increase, causing its supply curve to shift to the right. Okay? So, like I said, I'm not willing to pay $1,000 for a bicycle. There's not many people I know, especially in West Virginia, that would be willing to pay that much for a bike. It's just not going to happen. So, the amount of bikes in that price range that are going to be produced for the West Virginia market is not going to be very large. So I wouldn't pay $1,000 for a bike. But I would pay $1,000 or definitely more. I mean, I'm just kind of using this as a broad example. I would be willing to pay more for a four-wheeler because it has a lot more use to me. And even then, I wouldn't really be using it. It'd be more for purely entertainment and enjoyment. But still, I would be willing to pay more for a four-wheeler than I would for a bicycle. So it makes sense that the supply of $1,000 bikes in West Virginia is probably much lower than the supply for $4,000, $5,000 four-wheelers. It all depends on the market, and it all depends and is subject to change. Today, I'm willing to pay this much for an iPhone. But when the new one comes out, I'm not going to be willing to pay that much for that same model. I'll be willing to pay more for the new model, but not for the old. So they stopped producing and lower production on the old while increasing production for the new. Okay? So the fourth thing is the number of sellers. The supply of a good also shifts as the number of people working to supply that good changes. As the number of businesses that produce a good grows, the greater production capacity there is for that good. Consequently, the supply of a good increases. When businesses leave an industry, the amount of a good that can be produced falls, causing the supply to decrease or shift to the left. We talked a little bit about the other day about monopolies, right? And a monopoly is where one or just a few businesses have control of the entire market of a particular good or services. The example we gave was the power company. We don't get a choice of who we pay for power, and so supply for power remains somewhat constant. The price for power also remains somewhat constant, right? I can't go and buy power cheaper from another company, so the power company gets to say, you're going to pay 11 cents per kilowatt hour, period. Doesn't matter what you like, doesn't matter what you want, you're stuck, you're out of options. When we're talking about competition in entrepreneurship, it happens all the time. It happens every day. There's a new technology company that's founded to try to produce a product or a service that's already probably being produced, but to do it at a more affordable price point, to garner a piece of that market and to pull it away from another company. So that will affect the amount of supply. If I'm producing a cell phone, I'm not going to make 70 million units of this cell phone when my competitors are making a similar item and making another 70 million units. It's not going to be good for me to do so because there's enough people buying my competitor's product that they're not going to want to buy my product unless there's a recognizable difference between the two products. So the number of sellers does have an impact on the supply curve. Number 5, the producer expectations. Supply is also affected by the expectations producers have about the future pricing of their goods. If bicycle manufacturers expect that the price they can charge will increase within the next few weeks as the weather becomes hotter, they might decide to buy more machinery and hire more workers in order to increase the supply of bicycles they can make available. On the other hand, the approach of winter will probably cause a decrease in supply as manufacturers cut back in anticipation of consumers' declining interest in bicycling. So, this part is kind of where producers take a gamble. A lot of times that you've heard it kind of said that some of this stuff is left up to the market of chance. I have to have the idea in my mind, if I'm making a product, that my good is going to sell this many units at this price. You always hope that you're going to do well, but you can use some market data to kind of suggest how things are going to go. They give the example of bicycles based upon weather. Okay, sure, people are going to buy more bicycles in spring, summer, occasionally fall. But in the winter, the people purchasing bicycles, the amount's going to drop way down. And so the supply also, coincidentally, needs to drop at the same kind of rate. You don't want to continue producing 15,000 bicycles for the West Virginia market in winter when no one's going to buy bicycles, because you're going to have those models sitting on a shelf or sitting in a box waiting to be purchased, and when you might come out with a new model the next year and suddenly those old models are obsolete, which is where you have stores and businesses that sell things at not quite a loss but way below the selling price just to kind of clear items out. So you kind of have to keep track of things and how that it's going to affect your production and how it's going to affect the number of a good that you're going to need to produce during any given point. The last thing, number 6, is government taxes, subsidies, and regulations. Always, you can't escape it. The government's going to have their finger in every pie. It's just the way it works. It's the way the market works. It'd be nice if we had a truly free economy, but we don't. The role that government plays in the supply of goods made available to the public is in direct proportion to how much government becomes involved in the market. Businesses count taxes and regulations as part of the cost of producing their products, and the more taxes and regulations that government enforces, the fewer goods businesses can supply. For example, in the United States, the Food and Drug Administration strictly regulates the pharmaceutical industry. As a result of the costs of abiding by FDA regulations, pharmaceutical companies have less money available to devote to researching and producing medicines. Sometimes governments try to encourage production by giving money or subsidies to a business. When a business is subsidized, it can produce more goods and thereby increase supplies. The drawbacks are that subsidies often lead to an increase in governmental regulation and a decrease in freedom and competition. So here's what I encourage you to do, and like I say, you don't have to, but I encourage you to do it because you'll be able to kind of get a grasp on what we're talking about. Go home. Ask your parents if you can look at your current phone bill, especially if you have Suddenlink, because Suddenlink always breaks theirs down into so many little pieces. You'll see that there's a price that they pay for TV, there's a price that they pay for phone, there's a price that they pay for internet, especially if they have all three through Suddenlink, and that's why it's a good example. In addition to the charges that they pay for television, phone, and internet, in each one of those categories for television, there's a tax and there's a broadcast surcharge that the government says you have to pay this in order to get television service. With your phone, there are taxes and fees that you have to pay in order to have phone service. You have to pay a 911 fee so that if someone ever calls 911 from your phone, someone on the other end of that line is getting paid. So you pay a fee monthly just to be able to call 911, and that's a governmental required fee on your service that Suddenlink is providing. Internet, same thing. There's an access charge, internet taxes and fees that go on that. And you'll find this in almost any industry, and you may not see it broken down like that, when you go to Walmart and buy a gallon of milk. You're not going to see the breakdown of taxes and fees that were on that gallon of milk because it's already been calculated into the price of that gallon of milk. So you won't see it there, but the farmer saw it. There were taxes and fees on him being able to produce that milk. The company that, bottled or I guess, what would you call that, jugged the milk would also probably have fees and regulations on how that happened. The shipping company, same thing. All of those things combine bring up the price of a gallon of milk. You may not be able to see it, but it's happening in the background. It's important to understand the difference between change in supply and change in quantity supplied. We've just been discussing changes in supply, which are called by variations in factors other than price. A change in the quantity supplied is caused only by a change in price within an existing supply. When there's a change in supply, the whole supply curve shifts. When there's a change in the quantity supplied, it's illustrated by moving from one point on a supply curve to another point along the same curve. So if you look at figure J, it shows both of these, okay? There's a change in supply versus a change in quantity supplied, okay? So if you look on S1 and S2 and S0, you have three different supply curves right there. And S2, S0, and S1, the entire curves are changes in supply. But if you look at the red and blue arrows, it shows the change in quantity supplied. Okay? So the blue arrow is going up and down the middle curve, S0, shows a change in quantity supplied. So we're not changing the entire curve, we're simply changing the number of units that are supplied. Whereas the red, as you can see, is a decrease in supply or an increase in supply. Those are changing the entire curve. We're not only talking about changing the price at a particular quantity, we're talking about changing the price and the quantity supplied. Okay, so you have both, and you have to keep track of the difference. So your homework for tonight, or classwork, depending upon how you get it done, is to work on Consider 4.4. You got 4 questions there, not a big deal. Get those done. They're due either at the end of class if you have them done, or they are due first thing tomorrow morning. Whoever's subbing will paperclip those all together and give them to me. As I said, that will be part of your grade when I get back. Okay? So that is page 59 to 62, section 4.4. We'll pick up again next time.